Hello, guys. So, if there's any issues or anything, you could just type it in the chat and Jordan would monitor it. And if anything you want to ask me, you could also type it in the chat. So I'm Kushal Jaiswal, and I'm going to give this workshop on the introduction to React, and I could show you how you could build basic web apps and create simple UIs and web pages. A little bit about myself. I'm a second year transfer student from the University of Melbourne, and I came here just September of this year. And I used to work in Melbourne for a year while I was on leave from my university, and I used to work as a software development intern and as a front end developer, where I mostly worked with React, building web pages and working on existing web pages. And after that, I was also a member of Google Developer Student Club in Melbourne, and that's why I came here and I joined Google Developer Student Club because I really want to impart my knowledge of React and other stuff such as Node and MongoDB to as many people as I could. So what is going to be covered today too? So today we are going to cover the basics of React, where I will show you how we could create a React app from scratch using the built-in template. Then we would know about JSX, which is a hybrid language between JavaScript and HTML, and which is what React primarily uses. Like you can also use JavaScript in React, but JSX support is much more powerful for React. And then we are going to talk about the React DOM, which is just like the virtual DOM used in JavaScript, orchestrated to support complex web applications and the component structure which React is famous for. Then we are going to cover components, props, states, and lifecycle methods. After that, we are going to cover conditional rendering and how to handle basic events such as on-click of buttons and submission of forms. And on top of that, we are also going to have some bonus topics on and some extra topics on React. So React is generally a JavaScript library which was developed by Facebook in early 2013 to build user interface, and it was started as an open source project and is currently still an open source project, and you can find it on GitHub. I've posted the link on the event description, and it's currently the third or the fourth most starred project on GitHub. And finally, after we are done with the basics of React, like I would do live coding while we do cover the basics of React. And after that, we would build a meme generator, which would we would build a basic UI, and then we would make requests to an API, which would give us the randomly generated memes. And it should look somewhat like, sorry for the delay, it's taking. So it should look somewhat like this. We could just enter a doc text such as Abe, and then bottom one we can just add John, and we could just fix the layout when we build it, and we could just generate random memes like this. So it's fairly simple and just fairly easy for a basic project, and I feel it's much better than a to-do list because here we are making a third-party AJAX call to a API which is stored in some server in the cloud. So I feel it's pretty cool. And coming back here, and I hope you guys have all set up, if you guys want to do the live coding, I hope you guys have set up you guys have installed Node and npm, because then you would be able to install the basic Node modules which are used to run React, and you can also communicate with npm, which is a basic Node package manager where all the different libraries used in React and Node.js could be found. So we are just going to have a small recap of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, assuming that you guys are already familiar with the basic concepts. So HTML is a basic markup text language which we can use to create web pages. We can build basic web pages with h1 tags and then some paragraphs, and we can create tables and lists. And CSS is just a style sheet which is used to design HTML documents, and we have to tell the browser how the documents could be displayed. So it's used for aligning the HTML text to the center of the screen. We could also make the images bigger, smaller. We could make the text relative to another text. And JavaScript is a basic scripting language which is just used to add functionality to HTML elements, and it's embedded within the document. So JavaScript is also a weakly typed language, which is one of the main differences between Java and JavaScript. That Java is a strongly typed language and JavaScript is a weakly typed language. So yeah, let's start with the basics. React fragment. So a React code starts with the React DOM.render. So the React DOM is just a package which provides DOM specific methods which we can use at the top level of our app. As you can see that after that we are rendering an h1 tag, which is basic HTML, and then we are using a vanilla JavaScript code, which is document.getElement by ID, and in the ID of the element is root. This just means that we are going to render hello world in the page, and the whole React app would be rendered into the element with the ID which is equal to root. So the top level ID would be equal to root. I'll just start the basic React app. So to create a basic React app, you just have to, okay, you can just copy this command npx create React app and whatever is the name of your app. So I have already created the app. So this is the basic React demo app. As soon as you start this app, to start the app, you have to go into the directory of the app and then do npm start. And it should just take some amount of time for the development server to start. It's basically a built-in VUI which React provides us with. So it's fairly simple and it just has a demo UI, which I could just show you right now. So this is the demo UI which you see when you first open the Create React app. And you can just edit it here. For our purpose, we won't need the logo. And for the app, we don't need any of this. Index.js. We'll just remove the export. And we DOM.render. We don't need React strict mode and all of this for the, okay. So this is basically the React component architecture, which I would go into a little bit later. So I'll just comment it out. But to start any React app, we have to import React and React DOM from their respective NPM packages. And as soon as we install any React app, it was already given in the package.json. So over here, we could see the different dependencies that a React app is using. And when we first start a React app, React and React DOM on line 9 and 10 respectively are the only built-in packages which are installed. So after running this in the index.js, we could see that this computer screen just displays a basic hello world, and that is the simplest React fragment. So now we are going to cover imports and exports in React, which is really similar to what the vanilla JS imports and exports. The only difference is that after ES 2015, ES generally stands for ECMAScript, which is a JavaScript standard which is meant to ensure the use or transfer of information across web pages on different browsers. And ES 2015 came with a default export and several named exports, which made importing and exporting fairly easier. And it allows us to organize the different components into a folder structure, which is the most important part of React, which is the reusability of any components. So over here, as you could have seen, app was a different component, which was a top level component, which was displayed by the index.js. So there are two types of export. The first export, as you can, see here is a named export where we can export any function. So if, let's say, we didn't want to export the entire app component, we could have just done like this. We could have exported app like this. But however, for most of the components, we would use a default export because we want to export the entirety of the component. And similarly, for importing, we could either use the parameter name of the function from the address, and the address to the folder that we are in. And similarly, we can import the entire named component from the same address. So I'll just show it to you right now. So instead of hello world, we would just switch it to what it was before. We just display the app component. Here we are importing app from the folder directory app. If you guys use VS Code and you have IntelliSense set up, then you can see that it's already giving you the suggestions as soon as you type dot and slash. So it's a pretty handy tool. And as soon as you do that, you have to make sure that the app has been exported from its corresponding component, and then you have imported it into your index.js. And in app, let's just display hello world, and the same thing is displayed here, but it's in the center because the React has its basic app CSS style, and that style is perhaps text align is in the center. That's why the app is displayed in the center. So now what is JS6? JS6 is just a template language, but it comes with the full power of JavaScript, and it's just used to render the different components inside the React DOM. And React, we don't need to use JSX, but it's just a visual aid because it has a lot of easy error handling methods, and it's really useful for people who are really accustomed with auto completions and the various AI tools. And JS expressions can also be embedded inside HTML in React, but to simplify the power of JavaScript and to eliminate the need for adding JavaScript as a separate file and using it as a script tag, we just use it as JSX because React is all about reducing the clutter and making our components as reusable as possible and writing as less code as possible. And this is a basic JSX template where we have created a function, and a function is a basic JavaScript function, which is a format user function, which is accepting a user object, and then we are just returning the first name and the last name of the user combined. And the element is a JavaScript element, and it accepts JS. We have to put JavaScript inside HTML. We generally use the curly brackets because we are embedding JavaScript inside the HTML to make it a JSX element. So here, element equals to h1 tag hello format user, and once we do that and we render in the React DOM, then this would be displayed. I'll just type it in the just 1 second. Here. Okay. I'm sorry, you guys could not see my screen. So here we are using the basic function which we saw over there, and then we are using a simple JavaScript object, which is a user object, and then we are having an element tag, element JavaScript element, and then we are going to render it. This is just a warning because we are importing app, but we are never using it. It should not be an issue. But as we can see, the UI displays hello Harper Perez. After that, we are going to cover the most important part of React, which is components and the proper lifecycle. Okay. Basically, React functions, they are like JavaScript functions, and they accept arbitrary inputs called props and then return the React elements describing what should appear on the screen. And components can be functional as well as class-based. Functional components are basically what you can see on the screen. It's just a basic function which we created, and we also created it using our web app. And class components are where we have to import the React, we have to convert the React into a class component, and we are going to cover it later, and I'll show you what it means back over then. And React elements are also immutable. That means that once we create an element, we cannot change its children or attributes. So we generally use state to manipulate data, and we are going to cover that later on as well. And components can also refer to another components in their output. So if, as we can see, welcome is a component, and welcome can also represent, can also include another component which is called app, and app can also encapsulate welcome within itself. And components can also be split into smaller components, but components should always be pure. That means they cannot ever change the state of the React elements, because the React elements are always immutable. Now we are going to talk about state and lifecycle methods. So state is really similar to props, but the only difference is that states can be controlled by the entire component, and a component can do whatever it wants with its state. However, a component cannot directly change what a state is. So to change a state, the component has to use methods such as set state, where we have to first define the state in the constructor, and then we have to change it here. I'm going to show you a demonstration of that after we cover this slide. And state can also be used with both class and functional components. Earlier, state used to be just used with class components, so we had to convert a functional component into a class component. However, with the introduction of React hooks, we got a lot of lifecycle methods such as use state and use effect, which were transferring what a React class method was doing to a function component. And React component also has a lot of component life cycles, which are generally classified into three parts: mounting, updating, and unmounting. So React lifecycle depends on how at what stage the UI is when we are starting it. When we are just starting the React app, it's like that means mounting. That means the React DOM is mounting into our web page. And as soon as we are refreshing our React app, or we are clicking on the button tag to just enter any form, then the React state is called updating. That means the React is updating in the lifetime. And finally, the last one is unmounting. That means as soon as we are trying to stop the React app and it's making the last request, we have to see that the React app is getting down from the DOM, and we can have also similar lifecycle method for that. And lifecycle methods tell React what to do when the component is in the state of its lifecycle. And as I said, state can also contain several independent variables, but when we modify a single state, it does not change the other states. And state should not be modified directly, but by using a function called set state. I'll show you right now how to create a functional component and how to use components and lifecycle methods. Okay. We have to import React, and we have to import use state hooks and use effect hook from the React library. Here we can also combine a named import as well as a functional import, so it's not an issue. And let's just convert this function into an arrow function. It's just a personal preference. You can also use the basic JavaScript function. However, I just like to convert it into arrow functions. Okay, let's just say first name. This is the basic syntax of using useState. So we first declare a variable called first name, which is the variable, and to change the variable we use set first name. So we can just do set first name as, let's say, John. So here, this is how we can change the state, and we can also use a lifecycle method. Let's say use effect. Use effect is a lifecycle method which is similar to mounting. That means it would be used as soon as the React component first mounts on the website. And here we can just have so as soon as the component first mounts, the name is updated to the first name is updated to John, and here we can embed the JavaScript variable first name. Or just 1 second. Just give me one. Okay, it's just a simple syntax issue. Okay, here it's me. Cannot here that if we could have passed, let's say, first name here, that means the React component would have been updated every time the first name has been updated. But because we are passing an empty array here, that means that the React component would just be updated once. That means during mounting. Wait. Oh, we have to just remove this here. Instead of this, we have to display app. Okay. And here, as we can see, the UI displays hello John, because we can also add any buttons here, and as soon as on click event handler, and then we can change the first name as well, which I would cover a little bit later into the slides. Yeah, so yeah, here's the events. So handling events are really similar in JavaScript compared to when we use it in a basic JavaScript DOM. And instead, the only difference is that in React, when we are handling events and the name of the events, such as in JavaScript, are on dash click. However, in React, we just use it as a camel case. So on dash click becomes on click as a camel case. And React names are generally starting, the React events are generally starting with a lowercase. However, with JSX, we can pass a function as the event handler rather than a string, because in, as you can see on the left hand side, on the left hand side with vanilla JavaScript, we can pass a basic string. However, we can pass a function with JSX. And in JavaScript, the class methods are generally, we need to bind the functions as well, because in JavaScript, the class methods are generally not bound by themselves. And there is a turnaround, that is, we can use the arrow functions or we can use a callback. As you can see over here, the code on your screen is basic React component, and it extends to React component. This is how we can create a class component. to initialize a class component, we have to first initialize the constructor with the props, and then we have to initialize the props with super, and then this is the how we can use state with React class components. Instead of using use state, we can use this dot state, and it accepts an object, and the name of the object could be arbitrary. After that, we have to use this because obviously it's a class method, and this is the function called handle click, and we have to bind the handle click function because otherwise this would be undefined. So the entire class variables would be undefined inside the function. So because of that, we have to bind them. And then in the render method, as we can see, we are returning just a basic button, and on click of the button, we are calling the function handle click. And after that, we are checking if this dot state dot is toggle on. So if the toggle button is on, upon clicking the button, the handle click function will be called, and in the handle click function, the handle click function will accept. And this dot set state is how we can change state using class components. And in the handle click function, the set state function accepts the callback previous state, and then we can check if the toggle on the previous state's toggle. So it's a not operator. That means as soon as we click the button, true becomes false and false becomes true. We could also basically use is toggle on colon not equals to is toggle on. But the issue with that is that React React handles events in an asynchronous way. So that means the events could not be resolved by the time we need it in our function, and the function would carry on going forward because it is not going to wait for the value of the event as it's asynchronous. So to make it synchronous, we are using a callback called previous state, and I'll just type it in the program and I'll show it to you guys how this works. So we are just going to remove this previous function. We are just going to comment it out. Here we are creating the a toggle class which extends to React.component. Instead of doing React.component, we can also do component. However, component is a named function, so we have to import it as a named function from React. And here we are just initializing the constructor props, and we are making it with super, and then is.toggle on, and we have to just comment this out. And it's in the screen, there is a button, and as soon as we click on it, the state changes from true to false, and we have this conditional operator here. So if the state is on, then if the state is true, then we make it on, otherwise the button would display off. So as soon as we click, if we check on the developer tools, let's just console.log state.is.on. So the initial value is true because that's what we pass as the initial state. And as soon as we click it, the state changes because we perform the event, and the asynchronous set state performs what it has to. And then because we are using a callback with previous state, the asynchronous event becomes a synchronous event. So we can get the update at the lifetime. So the React application does have to wait a few microseconds until the state update has been completed. So then we can just do on and off like this, and it should be toggling similarly. And we can see the value in the console. On is true, off is false. And now we are going to cover conditional rendering. And conditional rendering means we can make sure that we can display different components based on the value. So let's say if the toggle was on, then we could display the name of a person, or if the toggle was on off, we could just display his age. So for conditional rendering, we can also create distinct components, and they can encapsulate the behavior that we need. And then we can render only some of the components which we need based on the value and a state of our application. So I'll just go through this example with you guys. You can just comment this thing out. So here we are creating a basic component, which is a React function, and its first one is called the user greeting, where it just displays welcome back. And the second one is called the guest greeting, which displays please sign up. So we are going to implement a state which would check if the user is signed in or not. And depending on that, the UI would display the corresponding message. Let's create a function. I'm using, as I said, I prefer using arrow functions, but you can use basic functions of React as well. I mean, of JavaScript as well. So here is logged in, which is being passed down to this greeting component as a props. So we had created is logged in our class component called toggle, and we are just going to pass it down to greeting. So let me just copy these things and put it at the top. Okay, so depending upon if it is So depending on if it is logged in, if the user value logged in is true, then we would display the user greeting, which is welcome back. And if it is false, then we would display the guest greeting, which is please sign up. And then we can render. We can just render the greeting first of all. Sorry, the name of the component should always begin with a capital letter. It should not begin with a small letter. Otherwise, React thinks that it's a normal functional event rather than a functional component. And in here, we can just pass in the props, and we can just pass in with the basic values. So is logged in would be equal to, let's say initially it is equal to false. So this is the name of the props is logged in. So we can do, we don't need it for this time. So we can just do instead of props dot is logged in, we can also use destructurizing of objects, and we can just pass is logged in over here. And then we don't need this line, and this line becomes redundant. And similarly, we can also do the same here. So both of these are similar. However, I prefer using destructurization at the top level so that I don't have to write extra lines of code. And depending on is logged in, we can display the user greeting or stuff like that. Let me just check if it's rendering. Okay. So Because the value of the logged in is false, it is displaying user greeting component which says please sign up, and if we change its value to, let's say, true, and it just displays welcome back. And we can also integrate it with the previous component where we had added the button. So on click of the button, the value would be changed, and what we can do is, instead of passing the value by definition, we can just use this over here. As soon as the button is toggled, then the greeting component would be displayed with that value, and here is logged in would be equal to this dot state dot toggle on, and here we can just render the toggle class component instead of the greeting component. So right now we have a button because, okay, I'm sorry, I just put it inside the button, so the button is just a whole big mess. Let me just add it as an h1 tag. Also, because we are multiple HTML elements, we have to wrap them inside a div tag. Otherwise, React won't be able to return it, because the render function of React only returns one HTML element. So that's why to display multiple buttons and forms, we have to generally wrap them inside a div tag. We can write a div tag just like in the basic way, or we can also remove the div and use the shorthand operator, and this would work as well. So because the state is true, that means the user is logged in. It says welcome back, but when we click on off, it says please sign up. So we have combined an event as well as conditional rendering here. So depending upon the value of the button, the corresponding state would be changed, and the UI would be changing depending upon what the button has its value. We can also use inline and ampersand operators for conditional rendering, as well as we can also use ternary operators for the same. A functional component called mailbox which accepts props, and props has unread messages, and the messages are declared a little bit later on in the code, and the messages have is an array which has values react, re-react, re-react, and then we can return, and then we are returning a div tag where we are displaying a basic h1 tag with hello, and depending upon if the unread messages have a length greater than 0, we can display the number of unread messages we have. The benefit of ampersand inline conditional rendering is that it just displays a true if the value is, let's say, expression, and that evaluates to expression. So that means if any value is true, we can display the expression. Otherwise, if it's false, we can do nothing. So that's one of the benefits of inline and operator over conditional rendering, because for conditional rendering, if we wanted to do this same behavior, we would have done, let's say, is logged in is true, then display, say hello. Otherwise, we can have to display null. It's not working here because I'm not using it as a JSX element, but to use it as JSX, this is how it would look like over here. And this is this. Here. You can just display it like that. Okay. After that, we are going to cover a bonus topic, and over here we are just going to cover how we can make basic AJAX calls to APIs, because we are going to use this in our hands-on experience when we are going to create a meme generator. And generally many libraries are used to make AJAX calls, and they are provided by the npm package manager, and they're generally like you can use AJAX, jQuery, AJAX, and it does not matter. But the simplest one is fetch, which is built in, and the simplest use of fetch is here. As you can see in the diagram below, we can just make a fetch call to any random API, and then we have to chain dot dens, and I'm going to explain what it means. So fetch generally takes one argument, and it's generally a URL, and after that it does not return directly the JSON object, because fetch the URL generally, let's say there's a really famous API library called Swappy API. So let's say we make requests to this Swappy API, which has its URL HTTPS Swappy API and people1. And as soon as we make a request, a JSON object would be returned, which would have all the values of the person who stored at root one. And the only difference is that when fetch is used, it does not directly return the JSON response body, but it returns a promise that resolves with a response object. And JavaScript promise is generally a state which which resolves, which has three parts, which is called uh, pending, failed, and success. And first, the JavaScript promise would have a state of pending because it's an asynchronous promise, and the pending state could resolve to either success or failed. And we are assuming that the response objects returns to a success. And as you can see, dot then response arrow function response.json. We are doing this line here because the response object does not directly contain the actual JSON response, but it actually contains an entire representation of the entire HTTP response. So to extract the JSON body, the body content from there, we have to use .json, and after that we have to use another promise where it would be resolved into the data which would be displayed in the console, and there we have to parse it into JavaScript because the object is returned as a JSON object, but we need to parse it into JavaScript for it to be displayed in the React web app. I'll just show you a basic example of this. For that, we don't even need to use the React console. We can just use the built-in Google Chrome JavaScript console. And let's just do fetch. Let's do it to here. We don't need these extra information. This just specifies the method, which is a get method, because we are just making a get call. We are not modifying any value on that API. And headers are content type application JSON. That means if it were a post method, then we would have had to send parameters into a function called parameter, and the parameters would have been sent as a JSON object. So headers content type application JSON, that means that the parameters which are going to be passed are going to be JSON objects. So we don't need that for the time being. And as soon as we do this, we can see the promise is first pending because, as I said, it's an asynchronous event. And after that, the promise would be resolved. And here we can get all the values of the variable which is stored in the API at root one. And let's just say we want to see what the response object is. So instead of response.json, let's console log response option. And then we can see, as I said, the response object is an entire HTTP response where the type is coarse because we are making a cross origin request to another API, which we are making a request from our local host API. Over here, the URL of our host is com/presentation, and we are making a request to swappy.dev/API. So it's a cross-origin request. That's why the type is course. And then there are various of other headers such as OK would be true. The status is HTTP 200 status response. That means everything worked perfectly. And we need to access the body, but the body is actually as a readable stream. So to make the readable stream into a JSON object, we have to use response.json, and then the body would be extracted, and the body would be extracted as a promise which would be passed on to the data variable, and then we can just console.log the data variable, and that's how we can get the name and all the different variables available inside the API at root people/1. Okay, so just close this. Okay, so we are just going to take a break for 2 minutes, and after that we are going to dive into the coding section. And as I told you before, we would be creating a basic meme generator, and the app will make basic AJAX calls to the API, and the API would show you what would be the name of the API. And at the end of the lecture, at the end of the presentation, I have provided a resources of all a collection of free public APIs which you could use for your own personal projects. And there are a set of other resources as well which you could use to learn React and dive a bit more into its complexities. And the memes would be displayed in the basic user-friendly UI. So I'll just stop my screen sharing, and I can give you guys 4 minutes and 2 minutes, and then I'm just going to finish the setup of the app. So yeah, the meme generator is actually, it's already in my GitHub. So I'll provide a link for that after the presentation, and you guys could just clone it, and then you guys could also use it. However, this is what the meme generator looks like. However, we are going to build it from the scratch. So let's remove styles. Jeez. Let's just display basic. We don't need these components for the time being. We don't need the CSS styling. Let's just Whenever we start a development server, React generally runs on port 3000. However, when we are running React with, let's say, a node server and we are making the node run on port 3000, then React generally uses a different port such as 3001 or 3002, depending upon how many ports are available at its disposal. So over here, if we go into the public folder when we first create a React app, here we can see the index.html of the React, and here is the div tag, which its id root. So whatever is displayed inside this is the actually embedded JSX, and this is the basic title. Here we can add the title for our HTML web page, just as we use it for building basic web pages. I've made it meme generator, and after that we can also add a favicon icon, which is the favicon for a web page. Over here I've added the classic, one second, I've added the classic never gonna give you up meme, so that's just added over there. And this is the basic. We don't have to go a lot of depth into the HTML because it's just a basic HTML document with a lot of built-in descriptions, which comes bundled with the React app as soon as we initialize it using npx create React app. The source folder is where our work is generally based on. So first of all, as we saw in the beginning, the UI had a basic header at the top, which was displaying meme generator, and after that we had two text portions which accepted the top name and the bottom name, and after that the image was displayed. So let's first of all create a header component, because we know that it's a reusable component which we could use in other parts of our app if our app were bigger. So we generally, the basic way of structuring React components is we create a new component called components, and it doesn't matter if it's small or if it starts with a small letter or capital letter. And let's just create the header component. So the first step of every component is obviously we have to import React from the React library to enable GSX in our JavaScript instead of using JavaScript. We are making a header class, and we are making a header functional component, which is going to be an arrow function. It will not accept any props because it's just going to it's going to be a dumb component. That means it's not going to accept any user-based input from the app or from our meme generator component, because it's just going to display a title called meme generator. So we are going to use the HTML header tag over here. And after that, we can display an image at the top with just a basic laughing man emoji, and the source of that image would be, I have just picked up a random image from the internet. You guys can use any image you want, but let me just find the source of the image. Okay. Troll face and would be, let's say, problem. Let's just add a p tag over here. It says meme generator. Okay. So we have to also export the header component so that we can use it and call it in our app component. We have to use it as a default export because we are exporting the entire header component rather than exporting it as a named function. Here. This I really love this autocorrect, the autofill feature of Visual Studio Code, and you guys can install. I guess it's called IntelliSense extension, and it just autofills everything for React. It also has prettier setup. That's why as soon as I paste anything on my dashboard or write anything and I save it, it adds the braces and it changes the quotes and it adds the semicolon all by itself so that I don't miss it. And I feel it's a really useful feature of Visual Studio Code when you are coding using React. So we don't have to use it, import it as a named component because we have as a functional component because we have exported the entire named component. So we are just going to export header from, we have to go one directory up into component, we have to go one directory down into components, and then we have to go into the header file. And when we are using import with JavaScript, the header.js extension is not necessary because React understands by itself when nothing is provided. It is either JS extension or JSX extension, which is this JSX one, but we can also use JS in in React. And then we can just display the inside the div tag. Let's just display the header. Till now we have not had any styles, so it's just a big image with meme generator because we have not added any CSS styling still now. So I'm not going to go through the CSS styling, but I'll just copy and paste the CSS command, the CSS file, and I would go through it and tell you what the different designs I've used. Okay. Style CSS. So just see if the styling is working. And yeah, this is the styling, and the styling is generally reducing the size of the image, making the adding a font to the meme generator text, changing its color, adding a color to the entire header tag, and let's just go through the thing. So the entire app that we are using should have a box sizing as a style of border box. Star means the entire app, and the background color would be white of the entire body, but the top is purple because we're adding it separately. Here's the header tag, the header HTML element, which is used here. And the styles are, we're just adding a basic height. We are making the display flex so that the image and the p tag are displayed side by side instead of one on top of the other. And the align items would be centered, background would be the purple image, the purple color, and this WebKit linear is that we are just adding a linear to the background so that you can see on the left side it starts with a darker shade of purple, and as soon as we move towards the right the shade of purple gets a bit lighter. Okay. And then the image tag inside the header tag should have a height of 80%, and it should have a margin left of 10%, which is the margin over here, as you can see, and the height is also reduced. And the p tag should have the font family as we I'm using this font family because it's like pretty basic, and the color should be white. Font size and margin left would be 60 so that there's a margin gap between those, the image and the header. Okay, so this is the basic header tag completed. Now we have to complete a meme generator component, which would be our functional component. It would not be a dummy component because it would be managing the state, it would be enhancing and then manipulating the state based on the API, based on the values that we get from the API. So let's just name it as meme gen. I guess by now you guys would have been accustomed to the first line, and it's always import React from React. You need to create a functional component generator, and at the end you can only export as a default. Okay. And over here, because we are going to use hooks instead of the basic class state, so we have to also import use state and use effect built-in functions inside the React library. And let's just, so according to the app architecture, we have a top text, we have a bottom text, and we should have a list of images, because the images are getting fetched from a different API, which I would show you, which I would tell you the API. And we should also have a random image which would be displayed at the beginning, because at the beginning we want our web random meme instead of just displaying something empty. So let's just make the necessary variables. The top text variable set text. Initially it should be an empty string. Bottom text text. Then we are going to have an image list, set image list, and it should be an empty array initially, and then we should have a random image set random image. And over here we can just display a random image. I'm one off the internet quickly, and yeah, this looks good. Let's just add this one over here. It's just a basic image from Lord of the Rings. So yeah. So this is here we have declared the states of our React app. This entire portion has the state, and then we have to, let's let's just check how this looks like. Okay, we have exported meme generator, and then we can just import it from folder and going to the meme generator component, and after header we can, let's display the meme generator component. It's just warnings because we have not used, but it displays hello. So now to think about the architecture of how the memes would be displayed, we have to think that the meme should be displayed as soon as the React component mounts on our web page. So that means we need to use a lifecycle method, and the lifecycle method would be the method of mounting. So as soon as the React app is mounting, we have to make an AJAX call to the API, which is stored in some cloud, and then we have to get data from the API, and then we have to store the data in our image list, all the images, and then we have to display, we have to say we use a math.random, and we can display random images based on the index from the entire list of images we get. So the API that we are going to use is called this. It's this one. I'll just show it to you. This is the API, and the API generally displays inside. It has the data object, and inside the data object is encapsulated the memes array, and the memes array has a list of all the memes, and it has its name, URL, width, height, but we are only interested in the URL parameter of the memes. So that's what we are going to tap into when we need to display the memes. So let's just start with the use effect hook. Also, you would have noticed that for every other user-defined function, I'm using const handle login. However, for the lifecycle methods, we are just using use effect. And even when it came to render, we were just using render instead of constant. This is because the lifecycle methods are it's got imported from the library React. As you saw that it got imported from the library React, that means the render, the use effect functions, they are all stored in the React library. That's why we don't have to initialize them, because it's a function that has already been declared. So that's why we don't need to use const when we are working with use effect. It should be empty, because as I said, we are just going to use the use effect function once. That is when the component first mounts. On update of the component, we don't have to call the use effect repeatedly, because as soon as we are making a call to the API, we are getting all the memes and we are storing it into our image list. So we don't need to make repeated calls to the API as soon as the React component updates based on the click of a button. So over here, we are just going to use the basic fetch as I showed you before. And we are going to make a fetch call to this URL. And then we are going to have to change the dot then. We are going to get a response promise. And we can name it as response. Then we have to do response.json to convert the entire HTTP response into a body response, which also is in JavaScript instead of JSON. We do that. And after that, we can chain another one. And now we have data, which is available to us. And data would be, let's just console log the data and check what we are getting back from the API. Okay. So, okay, wait, I'm not calling this. Okay, so we have to store the data into our variable. So as we saw that data has the returned response would have the object data, and inside memes we are going to get all our memes. So we have to set image list. We have to go into data because it's stored as data here, and then we have to go and tap into the memes object and get the entire set of memes over here into our set image list, into our image list array. And over here, let's create a form first, because we are going to have a form with input tags where we are going to input our top text and the bottom text. So let's just create a JavaScript form. Instead of using class name here, we are going to use camel case because JSX uses camel case. And we are going to make it, the name would be meme form. I would go through the CSS is already being created. I would go through it with you guys after I finish this form. And then we're going to have two input tags for the top text and the bottom text. First input tag would be here. It will have a name of top text, value of, so the value would be just top text. Because it's a JavaScript object, we are embedding it using curly brackets, and it would have a placeholder. Let's say enter the top text, and then we are going to add an event handler called onChange. So onChange of the input tag. So as soon as we input anything into the input tag, we would make a call to a random. Let's say we are going to make a call to a function which is going to display the text which we are going to tag, which we are going to type into the input tag inside the box. So we are going to create a function here. So we are going to create it later. And let's close the input tag. Let's copy the same for the bottom text. Okay. And after that, we are going to add a button. And as we saw in the beginning, on click of the button, a randomly generated meme would be displayed. So the button should have an on-click event handler. And on click of the button, some function would be called, which would manage the generation of random memes, because we have already gotten all the memes and we have stored it on line 13 under the array image list. But on click of the button, we are going to have to segregate the images from the image list array and display them randomly. So we are going to write the logic for it after we finish this form. And let's just make it, let's just call the button generate, and let's close the form tag. And now we are going to have to display the image which we would be getting from the form, from the API. But before that, let's complete the functions for the input tag, where the text would be displayed in the input tag as soon as we type it. So let's call the function const handle change, because it's handling the change in the input tag. And over here in these functions, as I showed you in the beginning, we pass an event, but this event is actually a synthetic event of JavaScript, which stores the all the keys which we press and all the like brushes of the text which we do if we are enabling touch and tap on a React app. But it's basically the synthetic event, like vanilla JS has its on event dot listener, all the event listeners, and this is similar for React. And we are going to use event dot prevent default to prevent the default behavior of the form, because unlike vanilla JavaScript, we cannot pass default value equals to true, equals to false, or true. We can't pass this over here because React does not permit that. So we have to explicitly make sure that the default value is false by doing event.prevent default. And now we are actually, we don't need event.prevent default here because the input would be empty in the beginning. So we don't have to do anything with that because the input would be empty in the beginning. So I'm sorry for that. This was my issue. And after that, we have to get the event. Let's just see what the event is. Let's call handle change over here. We are not doing this dot handle change because it's a functional component, so that's pretty easy here. Okay, let's just create another function. We are going to call it const on button submit. I'm just creating it's so that I can compile the program. I just pass this empty function here. Okay, let's just see how our meme generator looks like. Wait, it should be. Oh, yeah. Okay, wait, okay, something is wrong here. Let me just fix this. Copy. It was just a silly issue where I did not add the braces in response. So because of that, the callback did not work, because you should always add just a brace to the callback to ensure that the callback is successfully carried out. So as you can see, it's a synthetic event and it has a lot of other properties, but we are not interested in any of those properties apart from the target property. And right now the target is null. We enter anything. It's not displaying because we have not enabled that yet, but here you can see the target will also be updated, and here we have to use event dot target, and the target property has a name property which would store the, and for the name this, I'll just explain what I'm doing here. We are going to use set top text text value. So over here, it means that the top text which is the value of the input tag would have the value of in event.target.value. So whatever would be stored inside the value property of the target property of the synthetic event, that would be displayed as the top text. So let me do this. Here we can see that we are able to write in the top text and it is displayed in the top text as well. But we can't do the same for the bottom text because we've not created that. So we can just do similarly set bottom text. We can just, instead of using top text and bottom text, we can also base it on the name. And so this should be value here. And this should be displayed here, and then we are going to have to work on the button submit. So on submit of the button, as we said, because the button we don't do it, so we should do event dot prevent fault, and let's create an index called index. We are going to generate a random number first. We are going to, the random number should be within the length of the image list array. And then we are going to set random image, which is initially an empty basic image, and we are going to change it to and we are going to call its random index. But this would not work because as we see in the backend in the API, the entire array is a object which has ID, name, URL, but we are only interested in the URL property. So we are going to access its URL, and that's what the random image should store. Let's just try and console.log the random image to see that if we are going properly. Okay. Let's click on, wait, I have not added on button submit. Have I called it in the button? Okay. So yeah, these are the random images which are getting generated, and when we click on it, it's a random image. Perfect. And now after the form, we are going to create a div tag where we are going to store the image. Name should be source of the image would be JavaScript element random image just out, and the source should be a random image. For alternate, we can just put nothing, and class name should be top, and this should display the top. Should be working properly. And let's just go to the styles in the CSS. So the meme, the position should be relative for the meme, and its width should be 100%, 90%. It's just margin auto. Then image should have a width of 100%, and then we should have the h2 under the meme should have a position absolute. It should be placed on top of the image. And this is just basic CSS styling, which I would not go a lot into it because we are not covering CSS in depth in this workshop. So I'll just try and see if it's displaying here, and yep, I need to see if it's, so as you can see, it's getting displayed over here. And just change it over here, and this is how we can do. And for the bottom text, we don't need the bottom text for the time being, so we can just remove it. Yeah. We can just display hello and just generate on random memes, and it would be generated on random memes. We could also change the height and width of the images which we are fetching, but it's all depending upon the CSS styling which we use. So yeah, this would be the basic meme generator app which we coded along. And okay, I hope you guys had fun learning more about React. And if you guys have any questions, you can reach out to me on Discord. And if you guys need any more resources, here are a bunch of resources, and I would be adding a few more resources to this, and I would be uploading the slides to my GitHub. I would be providing a link to them, and as well I would be providing a link to the meme generator that we used, and I would be also providing a link to the React demo that we worked on, where we looked into the basic components, the props, all the lifecycle methods, and all the conditional rendering. So yeah, I'm going to stop the share now. And okay. And once again, I would like to thank Jordan for this opportunity, for giving me the opportunity to organize this workshop on React. And yeah, thanks a lot for attending this workshop. And I hope you guys learned something here. I'm actually sorry because it was a bit difficult during the code along section, because it would have taken a lot more time to go into a bit of more depth. So I might have missed out on some points. I would say, like, I did not cover point like form React form. So that was the issue. We did not have a lot of time, but thanks a lot for attending this event, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. Thank you.